National Association of Black and White Men Together. As part of our program, we're interviewing longtime significant members of the National Association, and today we're interviewing Paul Sears, also known as Low Rent. He may explain that later. Paul is from BW&T Detroit. He's a native of Indianapolis. He's lived in Michigan many years, where he worked for General Motors and recently retired, and he lives outside of Flint. And he's been involved in the National for, what, at least 10, 12, 15 years. So, good morning.
Good morning.
When did you first get involved in Black and White Men Together? Locally and then nationally?
I joined the Detroit chapter in 1983 in January, and I found an ad, I can't remember, it was in one of the gay rags in Michigan, that talked about this black and white organization. And since that's the orientation I was leaning towards, I thought this might be one way that I could find out what's it about by joining. So I did.
And when did you first get involved with the National?
I got first involved with the National in 1988. That was the first time I ran for the board. I didn't make it at the Boston convention, but I did get appointed in January of '89 to fill a vacancy, since I was next in line according to the votes.
Was the Boston convention the first convention you had attended?
No. The first convention was New York.
In 1986?
In 1986, yes.
And what prompted you to go to that? What got you interested?
The Detroit chapter was not a part of it used to be the IA, and then when we
the International
Association,
mm-hmm.
And then when we got our 501c, we couldn't be IA anymore. We had to be NA, which is the National Association. So in 1985, Detroit, one of our Detroit members, said that he wanted us to become a part of the National Association. So he paid our fee to join in 1985. Well, that meant that we could be represented in 1986 at New York's convention. So I was one of the delegates, along with John Kavanaugh. We were the two delegates to the National Convention. So that's how I got on the national level to find out what it was about, the conventions.
What was that first convention like for you? What were your impressions?
It was that was the first year I think they had the House of Delegates, if I'm not mistaken, and they were electing James Credo and Tom Horan were elected, but the election process was kind of overwhelming, because John and I were green and we didn't quite know what was going on, and it was I hate to say this, but it was kind of a brouhaha, because it was just everybody was shouting and carrying on, and I was just saying to myself, what is this? But it was just that the emotion in the room, because people had their own, it's just the way they did things, which I later on respected, because I got to know these people, and it wasn't a brouhaha. It was just the way they expressed themselves. But somebody from off the street, so to say, it was kind of confusing.
Well, there were quite a few people running for co-chair that year.
Yes, there was.
That was kind of unusual.
Yes, it was. There was quite a few blacks and quite a few whites, and so therefore when they had the candidates forum, there was some trade-offs. Somebody would. It was very interesting. It was and educational.
What else do you remember about that convention besides the election?
The main thing was the Black Caucus. I met so many black brothers at that time from across the country, and I'm sad to say most of them are gone now, but I went to my first Black Caucus, and I mean, we were in there, I don't want to tell what went on, but it was so uplifting that people agreed with or sympathized with the problems you'd been through, and it was really emotional. In fact, we come out of there singing "We Shall," I think it was "We Shall Overcome," and John Bush had us singing that, and It was very. It was. I really liked. That was a high point.
Was that different from your experience with the local chapter in Detroit, or were they similar? Or
Well, see, that was only. I'd only been with the local chapter 3 years, and the local chapter. There was a lot of us were closeted. You know what I mean? We were out, but we weren't out. I'm talking about the years I was there. Now I don't know what it was the 2 years before, because the chapter started in '81. But we did things, and I don't want to say this about Detroit. The Detroit chapter just didn't run around to different chapters because we were sort of isolated because we didn't join. I went to my first anniversary was Cleveland in November of 1983, and that's when I met people from Pittsburgh and Youngstown who invited me to their anniversaries. And I'm happy to say that I've been going to Youngstown's and Cleveland since then, and I've missed very few anniversaries. But I got to find out that by going to these other chapters, and that's one of the things I talk about with chapter development, that when you go to other chapters, you find out from them where you don't have to reinvent the wheel because they're going through the same problems you have, and you can learn from that just by visiting. On a visit, that you can pick up ideas so that you can take back to your own chapter.
so that was your early experience on the local chapter and with other chapters, which I'm sure, as you'll tell us later, got you into your famed chapter outreach and visiting chapters all over the country. You then went to the convention the following year, also in
I've been to
in
all
Milwaukee?
all the succeeding conventions.
All the succeeding
Yes,
conventions.
all the that was my first one, and I've been to every one. And
then you ran for the board in 1988.
1988, yes.
What caused you to do that? What prompted
Well, I didn't have enough faith in myself to get on the board, and John Bush and Tom Horan and Don Moses and Stephen, what was the guy from Providence? Stephen Fisher. They sort of thought that I'd make a good board member, so I didn't have that much confidence in myself, so I decided to run. As I said earlier, I didn't make it, but I got appointed in '89 to fill a vacancy that had come up.
And you stayed on the board?
I stayed on the board from '89 until '98.
How were you say you've attended all the conventions since then. How were the early conventions different from some of the later ones, if they were?
Yeah, my impression, I think the earlier ones were more political oriented. There was more things to fight for at that time. There was carting going on. There was in the local chapters, so I hear, and there was just more. It was more politicized. Now I think it's more socialized.
But why do you think that is? Do you think it's the people involved, or that there are different issues, or the times have changed?
Times have changed, and also we must remember that in the '80s we were the only game in town, and now there's so many groups that are there's Latinos, there's Asians, there's black groups, and at that time, the early '80s, that it was non-existent, and I think everybody's gone to their own little individual pie rather than the big table.
What now, you said the early conventions were more political, and you obviously attended the 1987 convention in Milwaukee. What's your recollection of that year?
The only thing I remember about that really stands out is the name change. And one thing also that I was glad was there, Michael Smith was at this convention, because generally he doesn't show up at the conventions, but he did this one, and also in Tallahassee, he was there. But anyway, getting back to the name change, it was an emotional issue, and people had, I say they had their agendas. They wanted to be more diversified, so they wanted to change the name. My standing rule has always been, I joined this organization because it was black and white men. I think men of all colors and people of all colors, I think it's too sanitized, vanilla, but that's my opinion. I think it just says the name, says it all, and when we run around and want to change the name, I just think that it's wrong due to the fact I know the National Association of Advancement of Colored People. Now, blacks have been called a whole lot of things, but they still have kept that NAACP, although they still do what they've been doing for all the years. And I always believe when you join an organization, you look at its statement of purpose, not what its name is. Because you might think it's just by the name what it is, but if you don't find out what its statement of purpose or what the organization is, you're going to be up the creek without a paddle.
So how do you see our statement of purpose? You see it as a broad statement, or?
Yes, it's broad. It's more broad than what it was because we've got multicultural and multiracial, and I don't think that those two words weren't. I think it was interracial at one time rather than multiracial. So I think we've broadbanded it, but my problem is I think if you try to cover too many bases, you won't be able to cover any bases. If you so I think that we're trying to do too much in this organization with diversity, and I think that we should be reining in on the piece of pie that we can work with, black and white problems. Because in the United States, I personally feel that it's a black and white problem.
Now you were opposed to the name change, but did you feel the same about the change to the statement of purpose?
No, I didn't. It's letting everybody know that we're open to all. And I know in some local organizations they say they don't want women, but the national organization doesn't say that, thank goodness, because we do have women in some of our chapters.
Now, were you a delegate to the 1987 convention? Did you participate in the...
Yes, I was a delegate to 86. I was delegate to 87, 88.
How do you recall the debate on the name change at the 87 convention in Milwaukee? As a voting delegate, what's your recollection of that?
There was shouting and crying, and I think everybody had a valid point, but nobody was willing to listen to the other side. I think everybody had their minds made up, and it was, at that time, PC was popular. Everybody wanted to be politically correct. That's what I mean by PC. And I think that's what some of the people that wanted the name change wanted it for political correctness. But then as we found out in our organization, what name is going to be politically correct? We've got men of all colors, we've got men of all colors and cultures, we've got people in all colors together. What is a good name? You know, whatever name we pick, it's not going to be the one that's going to have somebody pissed off. It's not going to be the one that everybody's going to accept. So as far as that's concerned, we just might as well keep the one that has been in existence then, and just make sure the statement of purpose covers everything.
Tell me, if you could, just briefly, some of your main impressions from each of the conventions you've been to. Just what stands out? What one thing stands out in your memory about each convention?
Okay, in 1986 was the first one, and what really impressed me was the marching down in the parade, in the Gay and Lesbian parade down Fifth Avenue. Well, everybody is really happy when they when they marched down Fifth Avenue. And we had this big banner that said National Association of Black and White Men Together. And as we passed the crowd clapped. And that really impressed me, that really made a mark on me, that here we are walking down Fifth Avenue and people are accepting us. There was gays and straight. So, you know, just reading the name, people just really accepted us for what we were. And that really stick out in my mind.
What about the other years? What about
87, let me see, well,
other than the debate?
The debate, yeah, well, the debate was, I guess you might say the debate was we had this speaker come in, talk about black and white conflicts, and it was 2-day or a 3-day workshop. And it was kind of interesting.
Was that
was
Dr.
it.
Kochman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was very interesting because he pointed out the differences and how it was very interesting. It was very educational.
He wrote the book Black and White
Yes.
Styles and Conflict.
Yeah. Very educational.
Now you've been involved. What?
Back up.
Okay, you've been in the organization since '86. And you've been on the national board, as you've stated, since early '89. What projects have you been involved with in the organization?
I have been involved with chapter development. I have been on the election committee. I have been on the awards committee, and I guess that's the 3 things that stand out.
You want to talk about what you did in each of those things?
Okay.
You've done a lot of work on chapter development.
Yes, we'll leave that for last. The awards committee, I worked with you and Don Moses on the awards, and every year we solicit awards for the national awards, and we've got different categories. I'm not going to go into those. But we ask for them around February, and hopefully we get the contestants back during May, and then there's a board that sits down and determines who gets what and when. Also on the election, you and I have alternated, I think since the existence of elections, but it hasn't been that long, but it's been quite a while. Either you were running or I were running, so when you're running, you can't be on the committee, so we just sort of switched chairs at that time. It's been very interesting. It's the bylaws are very complicated, and and when you explain to people how the election process, they look at you like you're crazy, but this is due to racial parity and also areas that they didn't want to be overflooded with maybe all Easterners and all whites and all Westerners and all blacks. So that's why we have these rules, these Jacksonian rules, I guess you call them. With chapter development, I started out on the committee with Ken Allen and Michael Warner. He was a co-chair at the time, and he thought that I would be a wonderful prospect for chapter development. And I just want to say this about one thing about the board. Getting on the board has been an uplifting experience, and also it has done a lot. I've done a lot of things in front of people, but getting in front of people talking is something I could not do. And it has made me, trained me in the leadership position of getting up in front of people and expressing myself, right or wrong, but at least talking. And being the chapter development chairman, it really has been good. And that's what I say about other blacks within the organization, and whites as well, that maybe you don't know how to do it at the time, but this here is a wonderful opportunity to learn how to be in a leadership position. So that's how it was with chapter development. Ken Allen, I think, he was the main chairman at the time, and then, we were co-chairs, but I was in the learning position because we had just created the Chapter Development Workshop at the Tallahassee Convention. And the Chapter Development Workshop was a compilation of all the ideas that the existing chapters had on how to start a chapter and how to sustain a chapter. And it's been added upon as years go along. We put the awards categories in there. We've taken all of the writings out of the Chapter Development Manual. That used to be in there, and from our members. And we've added chapters in conflicts from a workshop that happened in Dallas, Texas in 1992 by Marjorie from New York. And she gave a wonderful workshop on how people can come in. We put that in the Chapter Development Manual. So now it's a nice document.
Chapters in conflict, what does that mean?
It tells where people within the chapter, people can come in and have their own agenda, and it just tells about what to look out for. People, if they have their own agenda, tell them thank you, but you've got to do it on a broad scale, and it's by consensus. If you can't work with that, then we don't want you in the chapter. So that's mainly telling you the problems that you could have within your chapter with starting and also sustaining the chapter.
So your work on the committee involved developing this. It's a chapter development manual,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
And then what do you do with it? I mean, you.
Once a year, thanks to Generous Motors, I was able to Xerox the manual and distribute it at the conventions. And I gave 2 to each chapter, and those that weren't there, we mailed the chapter development manual. Now, I know a lot of people says we didn't know one existed, but you know, you can only do so much. You can either mail it to them or give them personally, but if they don't take it back to the chapters, then they won't know that we do this.
But you've done a lot of personal follow-up and visits yourself, right? And you
yes.
do a presentation to
Yes,
chapters,
yes,
don't you?
yes.
Talk about that a little.
The chapter development workshop is available for old chapters as well as new. And the first 2 years, that's what we did. We went around to the old chapters. Well, not old chapters, but the ones that are in existence. And they fine-tuned the workshop. And in 1995, we used to have it in a roll-up deal, but now we've got it on flip charts, and it's really nice. The one thing about I've learned going across the country, everybody has the same problems, but each region is totally different. So what works in Milwaukee won't work in Detroit, and what works in Detroit won't work in Miami, and stuff like that. But they can pick up ideas. They can pick up ideas because it'll tell them about fundraising, how to get publications, how to make sure that you get publications, make sure you get a a post office box, and preferably a phone number. So all of this is in the manual, but it's explained in better detail rather than me going through it right now.
How many times do you think you've given the chapter development workshop in individual chapters? You've traveled all over the country.
Yes, and I love to travel, so it wasn't a hindrance to me because I like to do this. But it's hard to say. I can't give a rough figure. It's hard to say. It's been numerous times, I'll just say, many, many times.
And do you feel it's been effective? Do you feel the chapters have...
Yes. The newer chapters, they always come to me after they get started. They says, we thank you for helping us out because we couldn't have done this without it. And they're giving me all the credit, but I tell them this was a committee effort. And it's been over the years that people have put their input. It's not just the Paul Sears chapter development workshop. I've had a lot of input over the years through this organization that has fine-tuned it. But it's been very helpful, and in fact, we're trying to get chapters started in Dayton and Indianapolis. We're trying to resurrect Indianapolis again. And already they've said that they had a lot of questions they wanted to ask, but after they read the manual, a lot of it was cleared up. And I'm good to hear that because we know that it's helping them. It's helped them out. We've got it fine-tuned pretty much for what we want it to be now. But it's a constantly as time changes, we have to update.
Now you're still working on that, even though you're not on the board anymore.
Yes, I'm working with Ed Brown now on the. He's the chair now, and I'm helping. Just because I got off the board doesn't mean that I've given up on working for the organization.
So you were on the board through a number of different regimes, I guess we might say. Do you have any specific recollection of various co-chairs or people that you've, or boards that you've worked with? Did the board change? Did it depend on the personality of the co-chairs? And what's your recollection of your years on the board?
Well, I don't want to be critical of any one board versus the other, but I do. My problem is, and we've talked about this before, I think, rather than talk about the board, I just think that I'm going to say something about the board terms. My personal opinion, I think that we should have a 3-year limitation. I know it's, people say it's too costly, but the reason that I found that people don't stay on the board is because it takes them 1 year to figure out what the board is doing, because we meet 3 or 4 times a year. And then the next year, they become productive. Well, if they don't become productive that second year, they become frustrated, and then they want to get off the board. And just staying on the board 2 years is not, in my personal opinion, is not good. I think we should go with 3 years, which we had a workshop in San Francisco back in 1990, I think it was, that this woman came in and gave this talk about that board term should be 3 years. But that's my personal opinion, and I'm just stating it here. But I'm not going to talk about the different administrations, because a lot of them are still my friends, and I don't. I'm just not. I'll just leave that alone. I did. Although I tell you one thing, I did like John Teamer and Michael Warner's leadership. They complemented each other. This was the early years that I was on the board, and I thought they complemented each other because John was more of a conciliator, and Michael was more of a he just said the things that he wanted to say, and that was it. And they sort of, they were hitting each other on the knee and pulling on their pant legs to get them. But that was my earlier years, and that really impressed me about being on the board and staying on the board.
How have you seen AIDS affect the organization?
Oh, brother, it's been devastating to this organization due to the fact I go back and look at the talent show tapes or the older tapes, and it's just, you say, oh, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone. And a lot of our leadership, especially our black leadership, is just, well, the white leadership too, but I'm always going to lean toward the black leadership because I'm a black person and I'm looking for role models. But a lot of our black leadership, especially the guys in New York, when I first met them, Cali Lester and all of those people. In fact, I think the next year he passed away, 87 or early there, and it's just amazing how many